the pattern that's developing here is find your guy, lock him up. Don't let this interview process play out too long, which is the opposite from what we've seen historically, is where a lot of candidates come in, come out, get on a plane, go somewhere else. Now it's find your guy quickly, zero in on him, and don't let him interview with anyone else. That's what we saw with Ron Rivera. That's what we saw with Mike McCarthy. And now that's what we've seen with Matt Rule. Three major hires with really no process whatsoever. Find your guy and lock him up, which kind of begs the question, what is the point of the Rooney Rule in the NFL trying to encourage the hiring of minority coaches? It is an absolute joke. It is a mockery right now. Let's talk about that with Adam Kilgore from the Washington Post, who wrote about this in the Post. Adam, good to have you on the program. It's Dave Briggs and it's Ross Tucker. This process that we've seen play out with now 3 head coaching hires in the NFL, and specifically the Dallas Cowboys interviewing Marvin Lewis, are they making a mockery of the Rooney Rule?
Well, that's hard to answer because I think you have to know the intent and what's inside, Jerry Jones's and Dave Tepper's and all their, hearts and minds, when they go to interview Marvin Lewis or Eric Bieniemy, who interviewed in Carolina. I think from the outside, I'm willing to say that those are legitimate interviews and not, a token interview, and that they abided by the Rooney Rule, and the Rooney Rule is, doing its job in the process. I think you have to just look at, whether or not the Rooney Rule is being, the spirit of it is being followed. I think you have to look at the results, and the results are really bleak for diversity, especially African American coaches in the NFL right now.
So, Adam, for people that didn't get a chance to read your outstanding story at the Washington Post, and we encourage them to do so, can you sort of summarize where the Rooney Rule is right now and what you think the issues are?
Sure. Yeah, that's really nice of you to say, Ross. I appreciate that. So I feel like the Rooney Rule is still, it's not the problem. I mean, like at the end of the day, look, like the Rooney Rule, like there are people from the Fritz Pollard Alliance from the NFL who go talk to like Congress once a year to get, those people want to know how it works because it's actually viewed as effective, which tells you something about society outside of the NFL and the way corporations work. But whole other topic. Sorry to go on a tangent. The issue is just who's getting the jobs at the end of the day, not so much the interview process. And it's a historic problem that is still, certainly is going as strong as ever. I mean, Ron Rivera, in the words of Rod Graves of the Fritz Pollard Alliance, that was a win for diversity. He's Latin American, and those coaches are certainly underrepresented as well in the NFL. But you look at the past 3 hiring cycles, if you include the one that's happened this year, at least part of it, and African American coaches are just not getting hired to be head coaches, and that problem is totally tied into sort of makeup of offensive coaches and the people who are in positions, to coach the quarterback and to call plays and to be offensive coordinators. The NFL has, frankly, and NFL teams have, frankly, a shameful history of promoting black coaches into positions that put them into position to be head coaches. Right now there are 2 African American offensive coordinators in the NFL, Eric Bieniemy and Byron Leftwich, in Tampa. And there are only 2 African American quarterback coaches as well. And as the league has really shifted heavily toward offensive coaches and trying to find an offensive mind who can connect with a quarterback, one of the offshoots of that, one of the issues has been that what was already a problem of hiring black coaches to be head coaches is now pretty much a full-blown crisis.
Adam Kilgore with us from the Washington Post. Terrific story on the Rooney Rule. Minority coaches in the NFL, points out we're at the same level of black coaches as we were in 2003 when the Rooney Rule was instituted. And per your point about offensive coordinators in the game, only 5 black head coaches in NFL history: Art Shell, Dennis Green, Jim Caldwell, Hugh Jackson, and Anthony Lynn, currently with the Chargers. came from an offensive background. You'll find that all in this outstanding piece. So if Eric Bieniemy, Adam, does not get a job, he's the offensive coordinator with the Chiefs this season, and it doesn't feel like he's going to get an opportunity, at least to me. He's getting the interviews. He got the interviews last year, though. If he doesn't get a job, what does that tell us? And what do you think the biggest problem is? Is it just the lack of quality candidates to choose from, or is there something greater?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something greater because I don't think there's a total lack of quality candidates. You know, I mean, they're not as high a number as, like, you know, white guys who are calling plays and being coordinators, but, you know, like Matt Rule is a great coach. Like, I would never cast aspersions on that hire at all. I mean, his results speak for themselves. But, like, where is the NFL interest if like, you know, Kingsbury is getting interest? Like, what about, you know, a creative choice like Tony Scott, the coordinator at Clemson, who all he has is win the national championship every year, calling plays? What about, you know, Dino Favors at Syracuse? He beat Clemson with Syracuse's roster, coached Jimmy Garoppolo in college. You know, he's like a sort of a very, you know, innovative guy with RPOs and air raids and all that. But where is their even sort of like rumored interest, you know? And I think at the end of the day, it goes back to, you know, the guys hiring the job. I mean, it is a league issue, but it comes down to the teams themselves. You know, at the end of the day, all the owners, except for Shad Khan, are white. All of the GMs, except for Chris Greer, are white. And you end up sort of hiring who you know, and you know, it's not trying to break any sociological news here, but like, you know, that's just if you're a white rich man, you probably are you know, conditioned to, you know, choose the white guy. Whether that's I don't think it's like overt racism. It's just you know, sort of a systemic issue that you have to sort of like consciously work beyond, and I don't think that's happening. You know, and with Bieniemy, you know, Tony Dungy told me a story that I think is really resonant. When he was talking about Eric and his chances, you know, he went back to like the Packers of the early '90s and then mid '90s when Mike Holmgren was having success, and you know, his staff became a real factory of head coaches. You had Mariucci, who coached there, took a year at Cal, ended up being the head coach at San Francisco. You had Andy Reid came out of there. He was a very high-profile coach, wasn't a coordinator, but you know, was a top offensive assistant for Mike. Got a job at Philadelphia. Up next in that sort of pipeline was Sherman Lewis. He was a coordinator, didn't call plays. He was black and never got a head coaching job, despite interviewing a whole lot of places. And that was what Tony was relating to Eric, was saying that, yeah, I think he's got a chance to be a head coach. He seems to be a hot name. But, you know, this has happened before. And the excuse when Sherman Lewis wasn't hired was, well, he didn't call plays. Like, well, you know, Mike Holmgren was calling the plays, and Mariucci was there. He was calling the plays when, you know, when both those coaches were there. It's the same thing in Kansas City. People want to say that, you know, use the excuse or the reason that, well, you know, Eric Bieniemy isn't calling plays in Kansas City. Well, neither was Doug Peterson, and for a lot of his time there, neither was Matt Nagy. They've had great success. Those were great hires. And the next person in line is Eric Bieniemy. If you want like a proven sort of like formula for a head coach in the NFL, the guy who was under Andy Reid and coached the MVP, Patrick Mahomes, you know, even though Eric doesn't call plays, he's in Mahomes' headset. He's a great candidate. And, you know, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, like, what's the difference between Eric Bieniemy and the guys who came before him? It's hard to find an answer to that other than the color of his skin, which is a really rotten thing to be true, but it's hard to find a different explanation.
Adam, this is great stuff. One thought I had is, I think it was maybe just a couple years ago. I don't know what the peak number was, but it feels like very recently, when you had Hugh Jackson in Cleveland and Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati and Jim Caldwell in Detroit, Steve Wilkes in Arizona, Vance Joseph in Denver. I mean, I don't know what the highest number of minority head coaches was, but it feels like it was as high as it ever was, but that all of those guys I just named lost their jobs in the last couple of years. What was the peak number of minority head coaches in the NFL? Because it feels like it was fairly recently.
Yeah, it was. I got to like 8. You're right. Not too long ago in like 2016. But I think what happened is it really is related to the sort of like offensive coaching pipeline. That as the league went heavily toward offense, hiring coordinators, hiring quarterback coaches, friends of Sean McVay, like all of those positions were filled by white guys. And historically, just like there's been, whether it's a systemic bias, whether it's, a lot of it relates to, a generation or two ago when black players were not getting opportunities to play quarterback, especially as backups in the league. I think that's really spinning forward. Like those are the people and players who end up becoming coaches. I mean, like backup quarterback is like the ultimate incubator for being a head coach. I think 7 or 8 coaches right now in the NFL were backup quarterbacks. Doug Pearson was a great backup quarterback. He's a good example. Anyway, so I think like that is not the whole reason, but it's definitely a sort of interesting factor. So again, to answer your point about where have all the black head coaches were going, most of those, if not all of them, aside from Hugh and Anthony Lynn, they were all coming from the defensive side of the ball. As it's become now in vogue to hire offensive coaches, the candidates who are minorities aren't there. And to your point too, I think it's really telling about who gets second chances. The only time in NFL history when a franchise when a franchise lost a minority head coach and then hired a minority head coach to replace him was when the Colts went from Tony Dungy to Jim Caldwell. And Dungy retired. Caldwell was the OC. They moved him up. And, so it that to me really does feel like, a lot of these franchises, whether it's consciously or not, think, okay, we checked that box. We have our head coach. Now let's move on to something else. And they're not keeping an open mind and trying to find the very best guy, regardless of skin color.
Hopefully what can change this process is the fact that right now, arguably the 3 best quarterbacks in the game are black: Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, and Deshaun Watson. You've got Jameis Winston, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. So maybe everything begins to change. But you bring up Jim Caldwell, as did Ross, I think, which is an interesting case. In Detroit, Caldwell posted 3 winning seasons, led the Lions to their first 11-win season since '91, twice made the playoffs. He was dismissed after going 36-28. Matt Patricia is being retained 9-19-1. Look, we're tiptoeing around the word. Is there racism in the system? Why would Matt Patricia get opportunities Jim Caldwell didn't get when he far outproduced him?
Yeah, I do think there's racism in the system. I don't think it's like overt racism, but I think it's the kind of subtle racism that infects, pretty much every corner of American life. And to think that the NFL would be immune from it, you'd be wrong. Despite some efforts on the part of really hardworking, good people to overcome that. Again, it goes back at the end of the day, there's 31 rich white guys who are making almost every hire, and they're going to decide at the end of the day. And so, as much work as you want to do, and as much information you want to put out, I think that the Jim Caldwell example is perfect. I mean, he's been to a Super Bowl. He made the playoffs in Detroit, which is like a miracle. And he coached Peyton Manning. Like, there's so many reasons that things that make him a good coach. Like, he took a year off after getting fired, and now he's on staff in Miami. But like, why would this is not like a knock on Mike McCarthy, but like if Mike McCarthy is like a really hot candidate, like what is as far as like their results, and like Ross, you know more about football and people in the league and what they think about certain reputations and styles and all that, but like just based on like results broadly, like why is Jim Caldwell not getting 5 interviews in this cycle? It's kind of maddening when you start talking about it. You kind of go in circles, but at the end of the day, like I said, it comes back to who's doing the hiring, and I don't think like any NFL owner is up in their office thinking like, well, they're not going to hire a black guy. But I do think that there's certain comfort with certain people that they feel, whether that's I think probably most of it is subconscious, but it's there, and there's really you can't deny it based on the results.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say, Adam, I do think it actually, more than anything else, it's from the quarterback coaches and then the coordinators, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that goes to who played quarterback 20 years ago, because
Mm-hmm.
that's who gravitated to the quarterback coach position and then coordinator, et cetera. I mean, you don't see a lot of former offensive linemen becoming NFL head coaches either, because not a lot of them become NFL offensive coordinators. So I do think that's part of it. My last question is just the Rooney Rule in general and
Mm-hmm.
how it's perceived among African American head coaches in particular, African American candidates, I should say in particular, because I feel like on some level it would bother me if I felt like I was only getting the interview because of the Rooney Rule. Now, I know it would still be incumbent upon me to prove myself to them anyway, but I'm just curious about what their perception is of quote unquote token interviews because of the Rooney Rule.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of many frustrations, and it's a big one. There are definitely candidates in the past who have been offered interviews and turned them down for that reason, just because they feel like this is BS. Like, I'm not going to let you use me for this charade. That being said, I know, I think it was Tony Dungy when I was talking to him. He said that he encourages coaches, even if they do feel like it's a token interview, to do it, because your names gets out there. Other people see it. It's good practice. I think those coaching interviews are hard work. They're grueling, and you got to be prepared for them. And doing one, even if it is going through the motions, it actually is useful at the end. So there are some coaches who, maybe on principle don't want to do it, but realize like if there's some practical use for it. And that's honestly part of the rule too. Look, I mean, if a team, has history with a coach and knows they want to hire that coach, I think that's like fair. I think that's naturally part of the process. If they have to interview an African American coach, and it's a little bit of a kabuki dance. That honestly, at the end of the day, like, it is frustrating, but I don't think it's the worst thing. I think it's like part of the way the rule works. Because what you want just people to be more open-minded. You want, like, when an owner, sits down to make his list, and he's heard this name out there and is thinking of that person as a potential head coach, which may not have happened if they got that interview, whether it was token or not. So it is. There's a lot of like BS to those token interviews, but there's actually some practical use as well. I think that's like part of why the Rooney Rule is a good rule. So it's an interesting. It is kind of interesting because it's crap, but it's also in a roundabout way, sort of like helping promote some more diversity.
Sure, and I think it is helpful for Eric Bieniemy's name to resurface and for him to go through the process. But when Marvin Lewis is 0-7 in the postseason, and everyone from coast to coast, let alone in Dallas, knows he's not getting that job, in that case, I do believe it's the mockery, because no one in Dallas would accept that hire. But it is a great conversation to have. It's a wonderful piece in the Washington Post. Adam Kilgore, read him there. Follow him at Adam Kilgore WP on Twitter. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate the time.
Hey, thank you guys. I appreciate it.